All right, the first thing I want to do is say that prayers and respect for Neely. He died in the course of this encounter, and prayers and respect to anyone who cared about him. Now let's get into it. Subway chokehold, death of Jordan Neely, probed by senior prosecutors as protesters clash with police. Video shows Marine vet allegedly killed mentally ill homeless man Jordan Neely with a chokehold on the New York City subway. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg announced Wednesday that, quote, senior experienced prosecutors are investigating the subway chokehold death of Jordan Neely as violent clashes with police erupted Wednesday in New York City. Neely, 30, was reportedly having a mental episode on the F train Monday. How sort of oddly apropos for him in this incident on the F train. Yelling and pacing back and forth when a Marine veteran tackled him to the ground and put him in a chokehold, according to witnesses and police. Two other bystanders helped restrain him, and video that captured part of the encounter shows Neely, a Michael Jackson impersonator, slowly go limp, then die. The city's medical examiner determined that the manner of death was homicide caused by compression of the neck. All right, let's get into this. What happened? It's an odd rerun of the past, isn't it? Jordan Neely, who had been arrested, I believe, 44 times in the recent past, who was no longer doing his act, as I understand, I could be wrong, as a Michael Jackson impersonator, was on the train. He was shouting about needing food and water, and a big man in a little cramped train wanting to know where he can find some food and water and blaming people for not having food and water is to terrorize the people on the train. As a consequence, a 24-year-old Marine vet decided to protect the people on the train and also to protect civility. This is something, and I'm going to, I'm going to try to restrain myself so we can keep these roll-in shorts short. But in the West, something that white people do, in my opinion, is that we maintain civility in our civilization for two reasons, among many others, but two I'm going to mention. The first is that we don't need to constantly be policed to have and create a civil society, because we are self-policing. But it is, we feel, incumbent upon us to maintain that civility and that law and order, even if police officers aren't present. So that throughout the history of the West, you can see where citizens take matters into their own hands. When there are disturbances of the peace, when there are malefactors breaking the law, citizens step in, and then they detain and maybe take hold of the miscreant until law enforcement can come and take them away. If you have a society where a police officer needs to be on every platform, on every corner, to make sure that people aren't robbing and murdering and raping each other, that is not called the West. That is not Western civilization. We see that other places in the world, but we see it increasingly in the West because Western civilization is being white erased. The norms of the West that emanate from Westmen are being white erased. And this happens in an ebb and flow. Incrementally, the West losing ground, white people and good non-white people of all races, losing ground against this anti-white moral imperative that argues from the position of retributive justice. You can go back to the 80s to see when this played out before with somebody called Bernard Goetz. At that time, Western civilization had seriously been rolled back in New York City. The subway had become somewhat similar to what it is today. There was rampant crime. People were robbed. There were sexual assaults. Check the data to make sure that I'm not misremembering. Bernard Goetz had been robbed before on the subway, and he decided he was not going to be robbed again. I believe maybe he had even been pistol whipped in the past. But check it out for yourself. He decided to bring a gun of his own to the subway. And then, when I think it was maybe 4 anti-white monsters decided that they were going to rob everybody on the train and smack people around and terrorize them, Bernard Goetz decided that he was going to step in and do the white thing. And he shot all 4 of them. Well, they didn't die. One of them was paralyzed. Bernard left the scene and no one knew who he was. And everybody at that time, I can still remember the news coverage, were elated that somebody had finally stood up to the rampant criminality and the terrorization of the good folks going to and from work just to pay their taxes and to get by on these shitty little cans, subway, racing into and out of and through New York City. Well, that changed quickly because the anti-whites, they make everything about the evil of the white race. Vigilante. Have you heard that before? It's in the mouths of anti-whites again. This person that had done this is a vigilante, and the full force, the full might of New York City law enforcement, and if need be, federal law enforcement, were going to be put into action to find whoever this vigilante individual was, Bernard Goetz, who had shot these anti-white terrorists. Well, Bernard turned himself in, and he was charged with several charges, found guilty of one, I believe, and ended up being imprisoned for nearly a year. You could check it out for yourself. That wasn't the worst of it, though, because when he got out of jail, the lawfare continued, and one of the anti-white terrorists sued him and was awarded somewhere in the realm of scores of millions of dollars, which, of course, ruined Bernard Goetz's life. That is what's done to white people who decide that they are going to push back against white erasure, whether they call it that or not. Our norms, our expectations for civility erased. Why is it that in New York they have already ruled this a homicide? Why isn't there a toxicology report? How do we know that Neely wasn't on drugs? How do we know that he didn't have a weak heart from a long usage over decades of cocaine or crack or something like this, and that it wouldn't take much, maybe just his own being fired up, that could kill him? Why hasn't any investigation been done into his health over the previous several years? Did anybody know who this was? Did he stay at a homeless shelter? Did they know he was suffering maybe with some sort of a congenital defect? It doesn't matter. All that matters is that someone, and in this case, a member of the most preeminent angelized group in the anti-white narrative, had pushed back against the norms of Western civilization. He had been an affront to the norms of Western civilization. And a white young man limited his affront to those norms. That is why it doesn't matter whether he was on drugs or had health issues or was on the verge of dying anyhow because of dehydration, he didn't have water, etc. All that mattered is that there was a white man that limited an affront from a non-white person, an affront against Western norms. And so now the question is, are we going to see another I can't breathe movement out of the anti-whites? Well, you're already seeing the protests in the streets, mobs demanding, like third world countries, that this or that individual be murdered by the state. How's this story going to play out? Innocent, innocuous, Michael Jackson impersonator trying to make a way in the world, in a society that makes everything hard on non-white people. And if everything's hard on non-white people, who's left? Who then is the person and group, the people who are making it hard? Westmen, Western kind, blaming you. So this innocent individual innocuously playing Michael Jackson for a few coins here and there came upon hard times. And the society, euphemism for you and me, white people, didn't do enough to feed and clothe him and water him as he saw fit. And then when he finally lashed out in pain about his hunger and his thirst, he was put into a chokehold of death. And now this individual needs to be charged with involuntary manslaughter, even murder. Alvin Bragg is the prosecutor in New York. He's anti-white. You know he wants to charge this Marine vet as harshly as he possibly can. But he also wants to keep the heat and attention and therefore damage on Donald Trump. So I ask you this, and you can let me know in the thread, not the live stream, but in the thread once the video is up. Will a charge of the Marine vet keep the heat on Donald Trump? Or will a fail to charge keep the heat on Donald Trump? Will there be backlash for Alvin Bragg if he fails to charge, or if the charges aren't stern enough? Let me know your thoughts. We definitely haven't seen the end of this story.